as if it had a history. And, of course, that was because Gaussian himself was a good enough biologist in the days before Darwin. He could see that life showed a history and it looked like it evolved, but he didn't want to believe it. So he created that Omphalos hypothesis. And the usual response to that is, for a scientist, that's laughable. And for a religious person, it makes God into a great trickster. And so either way, it's not satisfying to either side. And also it's untestable, right? There's no scientific way to do that, test that hypothesis.
And we can go ahead and throw out the dinosaurs.
Basically, if anyone says to you it's possible or fake, just tell them go out on one of these digs sometime and find the bones yourself. And there's nobody been there before you. They're in solid rock. Nobody had a chance to do that. In fact, most cases, nobody's ever been to the spot. When you find bones, you're the first person there. And there's no possibility that anyone's faked that.
While we're at it, can we dispel the myth that that men walked with dinosaurs as well?
Yep. Well, the birds, of course, which are still walking with us now. But yes, the only time that's been seriously taken up by the creationist community was in the days when they were trying to push the Paluxy River tracks in Texas as evidence of human tracks with dinosaurs. And the dinosaur tracks in Paluxy, of course, are real. They're famous lower Cretaceous bed that has sauropod and theropod tracks all over it. I've been there. It's a pretty spectacular place. But the so-called human tracks, they are a combination of things. Many of them, if you look at the pictures that were shown, they are obviously hoaxes that were carved by someone to sell to the market, because that was the word that was out from way before the Great Depression. And if you look at them closely, the hoaxes are clearly hoaxes because the footprint doesn't look like an actual human footprint. It does not have the proper ways in which the toes embed, in which the arch of the foot is there. It's all just chiseled flat, like the guy had terrible flat feet. So we can tell right away it's a hoax. The most common example of what are supposed human footprints at Paluxy River are these theropod tracks that are three-toed initially, but the side toes are shallow. And when the mud slumps back into the central toe imprint, it looks sort of human-like if you look at it. But those are just a consequence of the way that sediment responded to their three-toed animal walking across it, and it's been documented many times. And in fact, the creationists themselves mostly now reject the Paluxy River site as evidence of humans walking with dinosaurs. They say don't use this argument anymore because they've been embarrassed too many times. It's clearly not a very supportive area for them.
Perfect. How do we dinosaur fossils? How do we know that someone didn't bury them there? How do we date these things? Because obviously carbon-14 doesn't apply.
That's right. Well, you said several questions you asked me. How do you find them? You go to the right age beds, right? So if you're looking for Jurassic dinosaurs, you look in Jurassic beds, especially like the Morrison Formation, Upper Jurassic, all over the Rocky Mountain region. If you walk along the Morrison Formation long enough and you know what to look for, and that's usually what the creationists don't know how to do. But if you know how to recognize fossil bone when you see it, you'll find fossil bone. It's very rich. And there's lots of stuff there. And every year my friends are out in the Morrison Formation every summer. They come back with lots more dinosaurs because that place is
But isn't that just circular? If you're just looking for Jurassic, if you call a layer Jurassic and then you say that those are Jurassic fossils, isn't that a circular argument?
No, you just call a layer Jurassic, you get what fossils you get. If I were to go to the Dakota Formation or the Hell Creek Formation or Lance Formation, which are later Cretaceous, I get totally different dinosaurs. Nothing like the Jurassic dinosaurs. And that's the point. The geologic time, every slice of geologic time has different kinds of dinosaurs in it. You don't get any layer which has the same dinosaurs. And that's by itself a pretty big indictment of flood geology right there. Now, that was the first part of your question. Then you mentioned how do we date them? Another long story, but to make it short, you go to places where you have volcanic ash. It has rained down in the middle of your sedimentary beds where your fossils are. That's the best kind of evidence, or lava flows sometimes if you don't have volcanic ashes. Volcanic ashes came out of a volcano, so they have minerals that's crystallized as the magma cooled, and that crystal locks in whatever radioisotopic dating system you're looking for, which is usually potassium argon for rocks that age. And so you take the best crystals you can out of that particular volcanic ash. You do a whole bunch of techniques to clean them up and to avoid anything that's contaminated. And if you get a bunch of consistent dates out of all the individual crystals out of that volcanic ash, then you have some confidence it's probably real. But these people who do this dating of rocks that old, they're the most hard-boiled skeptics you'll ever find. They don't believe even their own data till they've run it 7 or 8 times. And so the idea that they'd fake it or that they deliberately publish bad data is laughable, because if anyone doesn't believe their own data, it's them. And yet they are very hard-boiled, and they're very skeptical and very self-critical, and they don't publish stuff so they're really sure.
Yeah, real quick, have you ever dealt with Dr. Humphreys?
Doesn't ring a bell. Sorry.
He is actually an astrophysicist, but he did work with the RATE project on the helium diffusion rates.
Yeah.
But,
I'm not too familiar with that one there. I've heard a little bit about it, but I don't know the details to be able to answer it very well.
Well, we referenced to your data. We had Dr. Hinkie and Dr. Sheldon, a geophysicist, and they came on and they tried to get him to release his data. He actually finally decided to publish something, but of course, where was it published? The Journal of Creation.
Creationist Journal. Yep.
Creationist Journal, right. Because the information that he had, they both explained in great detail, was basically the data that he had was correct, but he was only looking at a very specific part of it. So it was skewed in his favor. But when you took it exclusively as a whole, it clearly was completely counter to what he had. Plus, he made one mathematical huge change. He decided to, for whatever reason, change. Paul, do you remember? Did he change natural log to base 10, or the other way around?
It was natural logs to logs. Yeah.
Natural log to base 10. Yeah, because usually when you have log, it implies natural log nowadays in math. But it was a log formula of using natural log, and in order to make it fit his data, he completely changes to log base 10 just because it was suited it better.
Yep, that's not allowed in real science. And see, the thing is, if he really were honest, he would have submitted to a peer-reviewed journal that had real scientists checking that, and of course, probably now get published,
right? Because
they would have caught those mistakes before it got published. A Creation Journal has nobody competent to read those things, so they're willing to rubber stamp it.
So, what is an index fossil, and how are those related to dating?
Index fossils is sort of a shorthand way to describe fossils that are really helpful because they are very widespread, they're very abundant, and they tend to evolve really fast. So each species is very distinct from the next. And so you find them, you pretty much know you're in a very narrow time slice when you have that particular kind of fossil. It's not by any means the only thing we need. I mean, most biostratigraphic dating is done with a whole slew of fossils where we look at their total range in time and in rock, and we calculate these regressions between different sections, and you can get very precise dating when you do that. That's a common technique used in oil companies and all around geology, and basically anytime you want to date rocks that have lots of fossils. But for a quick and dirty way, for example, if you're in a particular formation and you see a very famous fossil that's typical of that formation, you call it an index fossil. But it's not by only means the fastest way to tell something's there.
So that's not how they determined. It's not a circular thing.
No, it's not circular. No, index fossils is saying this fossil is particularly useful to recognize this time slice or this formation. But there are hundreds of other fossils that we could also use. And so that's the point. These people don't realize it's not something special. It's just something that's really easy to spot and usually very abundant and very, very distinctive. So anybody who knows the first thing about fossils will know that that's Spheriford Grimesii. I must be in the Burlington Limestone because that's the index fossil of that formation. That's all it tells you.
Paul, did you have any more questions, or if you may go to there's quite a few in the live chat.
Yeah, I was going to say let's throw to live chat for a while if you want.
Okay, I'm going to start out with one that I believe is very important to get an answer to in the wake of the hit film this year, The Meg. Is the megalodon? Is it possible that the megalodon still exists in our oceans?
No. Simple answer. The youngest known fossil of megalodon, that's what you should say. Actually, when you say megalodon, that's actually the name of a clam. The correct name is Carcharicles megalodon. The oldest fossil of Carcharicles megalodon is 2 million years old, and they died out sometime during the ice ages. And the oceans are not that unexplored, especially for an animal that large. I would say the chance is approaching zero that it's still alive.
I'm just screwing everyone's name up today. It's the theme that I have.
Oh, no, the whole public. And then when you make a movie with the wrong name in the title, everyone learns it the wrong way.
Okay, let's get to some serious questions now. TJ Jump asks, how much does punctuated equilibrium contribute to evolution versus Darwinian evolution?
Well, it's not versus Darwinian evolution. It's part of it. And that's the first misunderstanding creationists often have. They think punctuated equilibrium somehow denies evolution occurs. I was actually trained by Niles Eldridge. He was one of the people that I was mentored by, and a very good friend of Stephen Jay Gould until he passed. And so I know it from the ground up. And all that punctuated equilibrium says is it's basic idea that if you look at modern species and what it takes for modern species to form, which is what's called speciation theory, the idea is how species form. We know this since the 1940s. We've known this actually. Species form in small, little isolated populations with unusual gene frequencies that are often on the edge of the main population. That's why they're called peripheral isolates, and that they form what's called allopatrically, away from the main population. The main population doesn't change very much because there's too many genes being exchanged, too much gene flow or mating between individuals for much of a genetic difference to develop. But a small population, it's a subsample of the main population, will have unusual genes just by the fact it's a small sample. And if they stay isolated, they will develop unusual gene frequencies until they are a new species. And that's the fundamental way in which we think most species form on the planet today. But that is happening on biological timescales. Happens within generations, maybe decades to a century at most. And geologists can't see anything that happens that fast, right? Most of our bedding planes are thousands of years apart. So something that happens like that so quickly is not going to show up in the fossil record. What shows up instead is that species form fairly quickly as far as geologists are concerned. It's too fast for us to see it. Once they form, they're fairly stable. So that's the equilibrium part of it, right? The punctuation is the fairly rapid speciation event by a geologist's viewpoint, which is millions of years. And then the equilibrium is how the species is stable from that point forward. So Niles and Steve actually realized this is something paleontologists had known for 100 years. Most species of fossil record don't change through time. They're very static. They're very stable. And it's only rare that you see transitions between them and that they start changing gradually. And that debate was started in 1972 when they published the original paper, the year I started college. And I watched it go through my entire educational career and the years since then. It's been one of the most productive and interesting debates in paleontology. And the sort of the takeaway message is that we now realize that most animals and plants that aren't single-celled and asexual, but are sexual organisms, do in fact show stasis and punctuation. And very, very few examples of gradualism, because that's what the fossil record should look like, because the nature of the process is too fast for us to see in the rock record. So in that case, Gould and Eldridge were vindicated. And very gradual. It's just like we were talking about earlier with the people who resisted new ideas till the day they died with the dinosaurs or birds. Same story here, although most of the people who resisted functional equilibrium get gone now. So that idea has very much become mainstream thinking. And I've actually personally worked on this a lot. I've done research on fossil mammals, the Big Badlands, and shown that mammals, the Big Badlands, mostly go right across the biggest climate change of the last 55 million years without doing anything. They do not respond to climate change, contrary to what a lot of people think they should do. And then more recently, when my students and I have been working in places like La Brea Tar Pits, which is only about an hour from here, we've done a lot of research on the mammals from La Brea Tar Pits, which go back to 35,000 years ago, and they span the entire last glacial interglacial cycle. So we have a big climate change here in the Los Angeles area. During the peak glacier around here, it was pine trees and snow in Hollywood, okay? So that was the norm. And yet all the mammals, all the birds we worked on everything that's common enough to do this kind of study with, show no change in size or shape or anything else, no matter how cold the weather got here. They just basically don't give a damn, as Rhett Butler would say. And so this is becoming a more common thing. We realize how much stasis and how much resistance to change is very much part of everything we see in the fossil record. But the bigger thing is that creationists will take that out of context and say, they've disproven Darwinism. No, it's very much in the context of modern evolutionary theory. It's just a side aspect of it. It does challenge a lot of the ideas that biologists had that species are infinitely flexible and they're always changing in response to environment. The kind of model that Galapagos finches is always used as an example of. It changes us in thinking about that, because we can see in the fossil record, if you have a long enough time span, which most biologists don't, the animals in the fossil record do not respond to climate over the long run. They may fluctuate a little bit, but they always end up back where they started. And that's sort of a challenge, is one tiny piece of Darwinian theory, but it's not by any means a denial of evolution.
Is it fair to summarize what you just said as major changes require major pressures? Like, is that a reasonable summary?
Yeah, we don't even know what pressures are there. We can postulate some ideas, but what we do know from the fossil record is that species, when they show up, they're fairly stable, and then whatever happens, we often really can't tell you what happened in most cases. They either speciate to become something else, or they go extinct. But they don't change a lot. Once they were a species, they stay very similar for very long periods of time.